In this section, we'll look at the imperialism of William McKinley's administration from the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898 until his assassination in 1901. I should note that as a result of the Spanish-American War, America also picked up the Spanish colonies of Guam in the Pacific and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. As for Cuba, the Americans occupied Cuba under General Leonard Wood. And while the troops improved public health and sanitation in their more than 2-year occupation there, the occupation itself did kind of seem to violate the purpose of the Teller Amendment, which of course had said we wouldn't annex Cuba. I could add as well that while the Americans occupied Cuba, a military physician, Walter Reed, determined that mosquitoes led to the feared killer disease yellow fever. Finally, in 1901, right before McKinley left office, the United States Congress added the Platt Amendment to a military appropriations bill. The amendment named for the Connecticut senator who proposed it at the request of the War Department. The Platt Amendment authorized American military to withdraw from Cuba once Cuba had agreed not to make any treaty with any other country other than the United States. It allowed for American intervention if any other country tried to challenge Cuba's so-called, quote, independence, and even assumed that the U.S. would have a naval base in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay. In late 1901, under pressure, the Cubans agreed to the new Constitution, accepting the Platt Amendment. Meanwhile, the United States had to deal with the Philippines. And this was more complicated than Cuba because it was an island more than 5,000 miles away. Initially, the United States only planned to keep Manila because of its fine harbor, but they soon realized that they could not defend the port without actually controlling all of the Philippines. McKinley, who had called the Spanish-American War, quote, a splendid little war, declared that the United States had to annex it all because the Filipinos were, quote, unfit to rule. McKinley's statement really ticked off the anti-imperialists still in Congress. Andrew Carnegie even said he would purchase the Philippines' independence for $20 million. Finally, in February 1899, the United States reached a formal peace treaty with Spain, known as the Treaty of Paris, which there are a lot of Treaty of Parises, so that can be confusing. But anyway, this Treaty of Paris included the United States formally annexing the Philippines for a payment of $20 million. The United States also was able to annex the Spanish islands formally, of Guam in the Pacific, and as I say, Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. Anti-imperialists in Congress tried to block ratification of the Treaty of Paris, but they failed by one vote. While the Treaty of Paris formally ended the Spanish-American War, peace still wasn't at hand. 2 days before the Senate ratified the treaty in February 1899, fighting broke out between American and Filipino patrols on the edge of Manila. A Filipino resistance force had fought the Spanish, and now it turned its resistance to the United States, declaring that the Philippines deserved true independence. The resulting fighting surpassed any of the fighting against the Spanish. In 3 years of war, 4,200 Americans and almost 200,000 Filipinos died. The Filipinos were led by Emilio Aguinaldo, whom America had originally brought back from exile to fight the Spanish. In the 3 years of fighting, the Americans ended up using many of the same tactics that the Spanish had employed, burning crops in villages and rounding up citizens. They weren't obviously beheading people. The anti-imperialists complained, but McKinley's victory over William Jennings Bryan in the presidential election of 1900, the same election in which the Republicans had selected the war hero Roosevelt as McKinley's vice presidential nominee, kind of proved that the majority of Americans supported the effort to crush the Filipino resistance. Eventually, Aguinaldo was captured, and the new Governor General of the Philippines, the future President William Howard Taft, sought to improve living conditions and kind of win over Filipino support. The resistance died down by about 1902, and Aguinaldo was finally given a general pardon. One question remained, however. If the United States controlled Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, were the people there U.S. citizens? Would these lands, be possible states? The Supreme Court in 1901 decided the issue in the so-called insular cases. The Constitution, declared the court, did not automatically extend citizenship to people in acquired territories. Congress could decide. A presidential commission was established, and the resulting legislation was termed the Jones Act of 1916, finally passed during Wilson's presidency. The act formalized a territorial government first established in 1902, which granted the Filipinos limited self-rule. The Jones Act committed the United States to future Filipino independence, but didn't establish a date. The Philippines therefore officially remained a territory, a colony, until it was granted its final independence in 1946, just after World War II. It should be noted that all who fought in the Spanish-American War and in fighting the Filipino resistance faced tough conditions, including heavy woolen uniforms in the often intense heat. Not counting the fighting against the Filipino resistance, 379 Americans died in combat, while more than 5,000 fell to food poisoning or yellow fever, malaria, and other diseases during or just after the war. The African American troops, moreover, faced intense racism, waiting for departure from Florida. Facing Jim Crow laws, many African Americans from the North were, unaccustomed to. The riots broke out before the troops from Georgia put it down. The struggle over the Philippines also sparked American interest in China, a vast, undeveloped market with tremendous natural resources that existed there, but the United States had tremendous competition. In fact, the United States lagged behind. In the late 1890s, following Japan's victory in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894-1895, Japan, Russia, Germany, France, and Britain had divided coastal China in distinct and separate spheres of influence, sort of dominating a puppet Chinese government. The United States had no such sphere of influence. With its military might, its only leverage, United States Secretary of State John Hay sent all the colonizing powers a cable, or note as it was termed at the time. In it, Hay declared that the right of equal trade across, all of China, and, quote, open door for all nations seeking to do business in China. Now, not wanting to go to war with the United States, but wanting to protect their own sphere of influence, the colonizing powers were vague and non-committal in their responses. While this was taking place, a rebellion known as the Boxer Rebellion grew in China itself against all Western forces. In 1899, a fanatical secret society known as the Harmonious Righteous Fist, called, quote, Boxers by Western journalists, killed thousands of foreigners and Chinese Christians. In June 1900, the Boxers occupied the Chinese capital, Peking. The United States joined the other colonizing nations in a multinational force to put down the Boxer Rebellion. 25,000 American troops joined with the other nations in capturing Peking, sort of saving the Western diplomats that were still there. The Boxer Rebellion weakened the existing Chinese government, the government which the colonizing powers had dominated. Fearing that the Chinese government would completely collapse, and thus allow other foreign powers an excuse to further expand their sphere of influence and consolidate, Secretary of State in the early 1900s, John Hay, sent a second series of notes, the Open Door Notes. He reaffirmed the principle of open trade in China, in which he had originally declared in 1899, and also announced America's determination to preserve the Chinese government's territorial and administrative integrity. In the end, the Chinese government survived, and the other powers allowed essentially open trade for the United States in their sphere of influence. This concludes the section on McKinley's Imperialism up to 1901.